O tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi kia koutou, no mai haere mai. Haere mai ki tēnei hui, haere mai ki te whare wānaka o Aoraki. Nō reira tēnei te mihi, tēnei te mihi, tēnei te mihi. Well, from wherever you are in the world, folks, welcome to my presentation. Now, it's always difficult to know where to start. And I'll be very frank about that. But the name of this conference is Grazing in Future Multi-Scapes. So what I've done is I've really made up a word, and I've called that word Indigenascapes. And really what I am saying is that somehow we've got to comprehend the totality of Indigenous peoples' association with place. It's not just an association of a community. There are cultural associations, there are economic associations. There's a multiple range of associations. So rather than trying to pigeonhole Indigenous communities, and clearly I'm talking about Māori today, well, the best way to do that is to jump out of that categorization and frame up a new word, which is why I've, as I say, made up a word called Indigenascapes, and I'll go through what I mean by that through this presentation. But in many ways, we can sum that up with a beautiful Maori proverb or whakatauki that some of you might have heard, called ko au te whenua, ko te whenua ko au. And the English translation of that whakatauki or proverb is, I am the land is me. And for me, that's a very, very short, pithy statement that captures what I'm referring to as Indigenascapes. And that's this totality of association of Indigenous peoples with their place. As I say, not only for food, but for many other purposes and indeed functions. Now, I'm not a really great photographer, but I'm really proud of that photograph that you've got on the screen there. It's taken from Lincoln University's Mount Grand High Country station in the interior of the South Island, or Te Waiponamu. But one of the reasons why I put that photograph as my opening shot is that on the right, you'll see a lake. And the lake is called Lake Hawea. And Lake Hawea, for hundreds and hundreds of years, is what we call a Mahingakai. Okay, so a Mahingakai is a food gathering place. Now that lake and the surrounding lands was important for the survival of Ngāi, and that's the tribe that I whakapapa to, or I trace my ancestry back to. So every year during the appropriate season, our communities would travel from the coast of the South Island inland, and then they would gather food. And along the way, there are what we call aratapu, or sacred trails. So we're not just talking about land here, we're talking about multiple associations across multiple generations. Whenever you talk to, whenever Māori introduce themselves, what they do is they recite what they call a pepeha. Now, pepeha is a statement about who we are, but it's not just saying, well, my name is Hirini. When we introduce ourselves, we locate ourselves, and we locate ourselves in the environment, and we locate ourselves in a place, and we locate ourselves in indeed in our ancestry. So the pepeha that I'll recite this morning is ko Aoraki te Maunga. Now, what that is saying is my mountain is Aoraki Mount Cook. Ko Waitangi te awa. The Waitangi River is my river. Ko Waitaha, Kati Mamoe, Ngai Tahu, Ngā Iwi. Those three tribes are my iwi. Ko Wainunu Nono Te Hapua, that lagoon down the bottom, that's my my lagoon. Ko Waihao Te Marae, that is our gathering place. Ko Horomona Pōhio Te Tipuna, that is my ancestor. Fine looking gentleman, I must admit. And ko Hirini Matunga Tukuingo. So really what I'm saying here is this is what creates me. This is what creates our communities. It's our association with place. It's the link that that association creates with our tipuna, and that's what creates me. So if we're discussing the notion of, you know, landscape, multi-scape, we need to contextualize it within that overall context of locating who it is that I am. Okay, so what does that actually bring with it? What does that bring with it? What it does is it reinforces the importance of connection, the importance of connection between people, ancestors, and place. And in Māori, we use the words tangata. Our place is whenua, and our ancestors are tipuna. So the notion of tangata whenua connotes that, you know, quite deeply, that association between people and place. And what does that bring with it? Well, it brings with it clearly not only an association, but it brings with it an extensive, intensive knowledge system, an extensive understanding of trends and patterns through time. You know, you're talking multiple generations, hundreds of years. So what we have is we have across Aotearoa, we have Māori people as iwi, hapu, or whānau, and their association with their place creates a knowledge information system, and that information system extends to our ancestral lands and also our environments, whether land, water, waterways, or indeed taonga. And taonga is the Māori word for valued resources. Now, those valued resources could be land, water, air, soil, a lake, a river, but it is also the knowledge about those entities. Okay, so that gives you a very quick introduction to what I call being Māori. On the way, however, there was this event, and the event is colonization. Okay, so if that was the system that our people in our communities, you know, survived and lived in for hundreds of years, and in other countries, you know, thousands and thousands of years. Colonization writ large, as I say, across the land, the landscape, indeed the foodscape, the thoughtscape, and I'm saying pretty much every scape, has created a series of what I would define as traumas. Now, if you look at that photograph on the right-hand side there, that just gives you an indication of the loss of land in this country from the 1840s up to relatively recent times. And what you can see there clearly is the wholesale land confiscation and alienation. It doesn't mean to say that the association with place ceased. It just meant that that association had to be re-engaged on new terms and conditions. So from land and resource use, so say large swaths of land in this country were confiscated. What that also brought with it, though, I mean, there's a positive side to this, folks. I'm just working through working through the history here. From communal title, we had private property rights were created. So it's a privatization of what was previously communal land, land owned by tribes and sub-tribes. The notion of nature's boundaries, what I refer to as nation boundaries, was replaced by legal boundaries and legal title. From this notion of ecosystem services, where the ecosystem was harvested for its food and cared for, we transferred pretty quickly to what I refer to as a system of ecosystem mining. Okay, so the whole perspective was changing during this colonial period. And I think we went from sustainability to various degrees of plunder. And some could say to various degrees of the current situations that we're facing and the existential crises that are confronting the planet. Okay, so really what I'm saying here, and I think this is probably reflective of most countries that were colonized around the world during the colonial period. All of this country is under the rangatiratanga or authority and the Kaityaki tanga or guardianship of iwi tribe and hapu, as I say. So if you take from the bottom of the top, from the top of the North Island to the bottom of the South Island, we have over 100 tribes. There are over 100 tribes in this country, and they have their associations with their place, as I described right at the start here. We had, and we still have, natural boundaries. So boundaries were determined between tribes by natural lines, you know, by lakes, rivers, streams, and mountain ranges. We also had and have a system of use rights, and that system still functions today. Even if we take the word whenua, which for Maori is land, that has a dual etymology. So whenua is not only just land, but it's also placenta, the afterbirth. Okay, so this notion of whenua just as a physical entity does not exist in Maori culture. So this notion of land not only as whenua, but also as afterbirth. And so tangata whenua being people of this place, and mana whenua referring to the customary authority and the ongoing associations between people and place. Okay, so what does this all mean today? So really what it means is that Maori have a system, as do other Indigenous communities, but I'll talk about how Maori conceptualize the environment. So if I bring this through to the discussion that we're having today around foodscapes, grazing, etc., there are a number of words that really capture this from a Maori point of view, and they are Mahingakai and Marakai. So if we talk briefly about Mahingakai, Mahingakai are really food gathering areas. Now that photograph there is a photograph of a lake not far from Lincoln University, and the name of the lake is Te Waihora. Okay, Te Waihora. It's also got an English name, and that's Ellesmere, Lake Ellesmere, but its Maori word name is Te Waihora. It does have another name as well, and that is Te Kite Ika Arakai Hotu. Te Kite Ika Arakai Hotu. And what the English translation of that is the fish basket or the food basket of Rakai Hotu. And Rakai Hotu was our eponymous ancestor. And so that lake in the background there was a critical, and still is today actually, a critical Mahingakai for Ngaitahu. And as you can probably see from that photograph, it is surrounded by farming activity and largely dairy farms. So clearly there's an impact of farming activity on that lake. But that lake has always been conceptualized by our people as a food basket, okay, as a food bowl. So how the nature of the process of management of land use activity on the edge of that lake has absolutely been critical to the health of it, and it is not in a very healthy state at the moment. So that's Mahingakai, and that's an example of Mahingakai. Marakai are more structured, I suppose, planned gardens, and kumara, for instance, I mean, I won't even go into, but really, I suppose all I'm saying is that there were two different types of food management. One was Mahingakai, and that is food gathering in natural areas, and the other is Marakai, and Marakai are kind of structured gardens that our people used to use, for example, for kumara or sweet potato. Now, I use the framework that I call the mode or systems framework, and it's a way of trying to, I suppose, conceptualize the key elements that impact, for me, on the environment. And so if you look to that that slide on the left, or that diagram on the left, I need to move these photographs, Pablo, because I can't quite see my own writing. Right, I can do that.
Okay.
Okay, so if I take a Mahingakai and Marakai, and I try to apply it to this notion of grazing in future multi-scapes, the definition that I come up with is the society of food production or food gathering that maintains, enhances, and protects the Modi. And Modi is it's an amazing concept in tikanga Māori. And Modi is, there are English equivalents. One is life essence. Another definition is regenerative capacity. Okay, the ability to regenerate and sustain life. So food production and food gathering that maintains, enhances, and protects the Modi, or the life essence, and regenerative capacity of the land, water, soil, ecosystems, and broader environment is what drives Māori approaches. Okay, this is really what drives our approach as Indigenous communities to not only the environment, but clearly food production. Now, the framework that you can see on the left there, as you can see, locates Modi right in the center. So what should drive policy, planning, management, land use is protecting the Modi, or the life essence, or regenerative capacity of our environment. And that's really all that is saying, of our environment, our land, our water, our soil, our air. And the way that we do that in tikanga Māori is through, firstly, our association with place. And in Māori, we have a concept that we refer to as Kaityaki. So the Kaityaki are the guardians of these places. Okay, they're the guardians. Their role is to monitor the health of our environments, the health of our water, the health of our land, the health of our soil, and the health of our ecosystems, and apply that to our environments, land, water, and soil, and other resources. And we also have a concept that we refer to as, we call tikanga, and these are the values that underpin this kind of process as indeed a management tool. So I really think that brings us to what for me is helping to frame this debate around grazing and kind of future multi-scapes, is firstly to ask that question, a really simple question: who are the indigenous people, the tribe, the mana whenua, the ahika? And the ahika is a Māori word for, a Māori term for keeping the home fires burning. Okay, ahika. So these are the people that are still occupying these lands, these areas, and these waterways. So this is really the first question: who are the indigenous people, the tribe, the mana whenua, the ahika of this place, this land, this ecosystem, this lake, this river, and how might we work together? How might we actually utilize the knowledges that these associations bring with them, and apply that to good management and sound management practice. So that brings me back to the opening, my opening whakatauki, ko au te whenua ko te whenua ko au. It's not just a statement, it's not just a byline, it's real. Okay, it's real. Because when Māori talk about their associations with place, they're talking about themselves. Okay, when we talk about our whenua, we're talking about ourselves. We're talking about our ancestors. So I thought, well, for me, we somehow need to capture as I said at the start, the totality of those associations. They're not just landscapes, beautiful landscapes, beautiful environments. They're not just foodscapes. They're not just wildscapes. They have economic potential. And so really what I'm saying is for Indigenous communities, and the way that I see this, I mean, Indigenascape is a way of capturing the totality of that association and not reducing it down to finite categories. So I mean, yeah, so that's pretty much my thinking on this topic. And yeah, I think that's me, Pablo.
Thank you very much, Hirini. It was a fantastic talk. I really enjoyed that. You touch a lot of things. We've been talking for years already. So I'm opening now the door for questions, door for opinions to Hirini. So.
Okay, thank you. Hirini, I should tell everyone, Hirini's my colleague, and our offices are just down the corridor, but we've never actually discussed some of these matters in a public forum. So, Hirini, one of the things that a number of us who are not Māori, who are Pākehā or people of the treaty, struggle with is that Māori arrived here 1,800 years before Europeans, and tribes shifted around the country. There were contests over land and places. And I guess one of the issues that many non-Māori struggle with is how long a people has to be in a place to start to feel as connected to that place as do the tangata whenua of a place. I guess, contextualize that in the sense that, will Pākehā New Zealanders, non-Māori New Zealanders, ever be able to feel that they are part of this place?
Yeah, look, Hamish, my colleague from 3 doors down the corridor, yes, I will. I don't think this is an exclusive arrangement as such, although it might appear in the way that I'm presenting. it's not an exclusive association. What I'm saying is that the nature of the association is different. By the way, Māori didn't just arrive here. Well, they did, but they didn't come in a jumbo jet or a boat. They came in a waka. Okay, so a major journey to find new land, a new place. It wasn't just like getting on a train. But the other thing that did happen is when the Treaty of Waitangi was signed in 1840, I think what that really did is that provided an opportunity to confirm associations that Māori had with specific places. And that's really what the Treaty of Waitangi did when it was signed in the mid 1800s in this country. So I think it's important to reiterate that. Is there a place? Clearly there is. And I'm not saying there isn't a place for relatively recent immigrants at all. I'm certainly not saying that. But what I'm trying to do is indicate that there has been a displacement as well, by the way. So there has often been a displacement of Māori people from the places that they have ancestral associations with. And I refer to that clearly in my presentation around confiscation. So everyone has a place. Māori been on the outside of that place for generations in this country. You know, I haven't even gone into, you know, the depths of land confiscation, but that photograph on the first slide, that is the South Island High Country. Now that whole stretch through the South Island was effectively confiscated. Okay, so what I'm arguing for in my positioning around this topic is that acknowledge the totality of associations. That's really what I'm saying. Working out a system for working with each other. Acknowledge the knowledge that exists and that Māori have about these places still. How do we build that knowledge into management and indeed planning for these places now that we share common space? And that's really all I'm saying, Hamish. Clearly there is a place for everyone. It's not exclusive. But what I'm saying is that tangata whenua have an association with this place that goes back over 1,000 years. You know, when we even talk about other countries like Australia, don't get me started on Australia, but even when we talk about Australia, you know, you're talking about, it's mind-boggling. You know, you're talking about over 60,000 years. You know, how do we build in these variable associations and intensities with place now that we're talking about shared common space? The only way that we can do that is acknowledge each other and acknowledge the knowledges that we can bring to that, acknowledge the historical context that we function in, and then how do we now take that and build that into a workable system. Sorry, Hamish, that was a long-winded approach. We might have to have a cup of tea as well.
And that was really good. Thanks, Hirini. Kia ora.
Thank you very much, Hirini. Go ahead, Ian.
So Susie's next, and then
Susie, yep.
Hi, thank you. I thought it was a fascinating talk. I'm in South Africa, and what really struck me is, even though we're so far apart and with different histories, how much we're grappling with those exact same issues here. I've got two questions. The first is, as a foreigner to your country, how does this play out at the moment? I mean, you're showing pictures of what is basically white-owned farmland, as we would call it here, and you're talking about the Maori connection to it. But in actual day-to-day terms, who, for example, are the livestock farmers? Are there any Maori livestock farmers, or are they really fully displaced? So that's my first question. It's just as someone from the outside who's unfamiliar, I'd just be really interested. And then the second question is completely different. And that is, I've done quite a bit of research with an anthropology colleague around these similar place attachment and spiritual attachments of Black South Africans in the province where I work. And we found a lot of very similar things, even down to, you know, metaphors of umbilical cord and the ancestors and the land and so on. And at times when, you know, we've presented this at conferences on, people will say, oh, wow, that's like really beautiful and so on. But people still actually think it's a bit of a fairy tale, because when in real life you go to villages like that, it doesn't look pretty and romantic and pristine. It's like, you know, there's poverty and there's reality and so on. And people sort of, on the one hand, love the idea, but they don't really believe it's real. And it's, and we're really grappling with how to bring these realities, which is, you know, are held by the majority of people in our country, into the mainstream of approaching management and relationship with land. Anyway, sorry, my question is probably going to be, yeah, sorry, that's long enough.
That's fantastic. Sorry, Hirini, I have to say something. Each one of you, feel free to interrupt. Let's imagine that we are all face to face, and this is a live idea. We are all in the table and try to talk. So yeah, feel free to.
That would be great.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, okay, Suzanne. Look, I'll just to try and your first question. Most of the photographs that I've shown, including the one there, no, that is a place on. Clearly you can't see it, but there's a tribe there, and this is the area that they live and work, and they do farming there as well. But in response to your first question, there's a major Māori farming enterprise in this country. Māori were very quick, very quick to grab new technology, new ways, new approaches, and apply them. So, you know, the so-called Māori economy is burgeoning, and it's a primary production economy. It's around farming. It's around utilising the natural environment. It's around using land, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, Māori are fully engaged in farming activity. And for example, my own tribe, Ngāi Tahu, has extensive dairy farming interests, for instance. So it's quite common. Many tribes across this country are major players in the primary sector and in primary production. Now, your second question, I wasn't quite sure what the question was, but if I can try and get a sense of what I think you were trying to say. Associations with place exist regardless of how pretty they are. I think you used the word pretty. Romantic and pristine. Those associations exist irrespective of those qualities that you're talking about. Because, for example, in this country here, you know, a lot of the places that were absolutely important to particular tribes, you know, might now be built over in a car parking lot. Does that diminish the association and the importance of that place? It makes it difficult, but it doesn't necessarily diminish the association. So these associations are real, and they're real today as they have ever been. But there are real challenges depending on issues around ownership, who has control over the planning systems, who has control over decision making, et cetera, et cetera. But if we could go down a rabbit hole to start talking too much about that. But I think that was the gist of your second question, but I might not have hit it. So you might need to clarify it.
Yeah, so I'm not denying that it's real, because I mean, what we're finding here is that it is absolutely real, but is that people, okay, white people or European people or whatever, really, I mean, here in South Africa, audiences, you know, who you're talking to, I guess it's because people think in this dichotomy of old-fashioned, traditional, whatever, versus modern and Western and so on. People struggle to get their head around the fact that you can have these indigenous connections and live, like, for example, on the surface, what we consider a completely modern life, and live in a place that doesn't look what might fit your image of traditional and pristine. And therefore, people really struggle to acknowledge the magnitude of that indigenous way of being, because it doesn't on the surface look like their idea of traditional sorry, I'm not. I'm
No,
not.
hey, look, I know what you're saying, and I think it is a challenge. But the issue who is it a challenge for? You know, mate, and I think what you're saying is the real challenge here is essentializing the meaning of indigeneity, essentializing what that actually means, and you know, there can be perceptions that to be indigenous or to be native to me, it means to look and act and be in a certain way. And what that does is that actually reduces being indigenous or native to an archetype. And I think really that's what the challenge is. So you've got to ask yourself, who is challenged by those perceptions? You know, who really is challenged by them? Is it, for instance, as you say, the white community?
Well, but also those in power and who are making the laws and the rules, and you know, who are sort of dominant in the way things pan out, economically, politically.
Yeah. Well, see, the danger there is that they potentially might be reducing what it means to be native or indigenous to a particular perspective that they might otherwise define as traditional or real, and I think that's what the challenge is. It's their challenge. It's not, I don't think, the challenge of the people themselves.
I think I'll add a comment here that's I think what we're talking about is that there's this sort of noble savage view that tends to romanticize past images and doesn't recognize that Indigenous people develop and change and prone to movement and so on, but that doesn't mean that they lose their connection with place and with their origins, and they still have a sense of ownership of their ancestral areas and territories and wanting to reconnect and have some sort of say in the place they come from.
Yeah, and I think that is a challenge in many countries, is this kind of tendency to over romanticize. It's like a Rousseauian vision of the past. You only need to go to any museum in the world to see this, where there might be static imagery of what it means to be native or indigenous. It doesn't really acknowledge the humanity of people, but what it does is it ossifies them and really turns them into a museum piece. So really what I'm saying is, you know, whose problem is that? I mean, where does the challenge actually exist? Yeah.
So
go ahead, Ian.
So I'll take us on a slightly different tack here, Hirini. So thanks a lot. I really appreciate the thought you put into the presentation, and it really resonates with a lot of the ways in which we've been trying to set this up as a conversation around the relationship between people and place. One of the big drivers of the relationship between people and land is the idea of what's called ecosystem services. You've probably heard of, Hirini. Yeah. So basically, it's the idea that people benefit from a range of economic, social, cultural, spiritual relationships with land. The challenge that I think I have with that is that it seems like a one-way flow, as in the land has a responsibility to provide us with these ecosystem services, and yet we don't necessarily in that concept, other than in order to improve our own situation, have a responsibility to land. Whereas I think your Indigenascape idea here is much more about also the responsibility that we have to land and not just the land to us. And so I'd like you to sort of just put that more in a concrete frame, and how that you know, sort of virtuous cycle operates within the idea of indigeneity in the context that you're operating in, and how we might update the idea of ecosystem services in order to be able to support the idea, or the ideas that you have presented in this presentation.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Look, thanks, Ian. One of the concepts I referred to was Kaityaki. Okay, Kaityaki. And Kaityaki, the English translation of that that word is guardian. Okay, and guardians are, and the value associated with that is Kaityaki tanga. So taking it from Kaityaki to Kaityaki tanga turns it into a value. Okay, so in Maori thinking, and the value is around, probably the best way of describing it is this notion of use, don't abuse, in simple terms. Intergenerational obligation. So we have a right to use you know, the environment and, you know, land, water, ecosystems as a resource, but we don't have the right to abuse. Okay, and there are many Maori cultural sayings that kind of depict that meaning. But the overriding emphasis, the concept of Kaityaki tanga, is this notion of not only use but don't abuse, but use with the your eye on the future. You know, the needs of our future generations, the needs of our children, our grandchildren. So it doesn't mean to say we can go and pillage and extract. So it's not an extractionist approach to, say, farming or land use. It's used for the needs that you might have, but put that use into historical context as well. And that historical context is not only the past, that we have received the environments that we live, we thrive in, and we can benefit from. So we've received that as an inheritance from the past. Equally, we have a responsibility to future generations to hand on, you know, an environment which is able to provide for their needs. So it's this notion of intergenerational obligation, which Kaityaki tanga really does capture. So it's not just using the environment for what it can give us. It's using the environment under specific terms and conditions.
So does that include, Hirini, the ideas of nurturing and restoring,
Yeah.
and that sort of more proactive than just conserving?
Yeah, it's not passive at all, it's active.
Right.
And so what you find in this country today is, you know, all tribes, what they do is they've got very active programs of remediation, regeneration, continually advocating, bearing in mind that in many cases they don't have the political power. They might not have the political power. They might not have the financial capital, but in many ways that is generating through our treaty settlements, etc. But I think it's this idea of placing our use of the natural world in a historical context. I think that's the main. It's just being aware that, you know, we can use the environment, but also that we've inherited that from the past. That's why placing it into a historical context in many respects does not privilege the present. It says we've received this as an inheritance. We have a responsibility to future generations to manage wisely. So there's a huge amount of energy going into this today, and there has been for generations in this country. And in many respects, Māori have often been what I refer to as the environmental conscience of this nation, you know, and have taken that role. taken on that role, you know, very seriously.
Great, thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Hirini. Is there any other question? I couldn't help and think, of the question that Hamish put together at the very beginning, and then whether we form within the framework whether we live within the framework, Hirini, that you describe. How long will it take us, right, to be part? You know, we talk and several stories that I've been going through in this land as well. You know, did it take 500 years for the gauchos in the Pampas of South America being recognized the people of the land, of the Pampas? So how long will it take? But anyway, like I said, we can have this conversation over a cup of tea or wine later on with him. But is there any other question? I see Frederick. Good to see you, Frederick, there. You know, Hans was around there. Is there any other question, comment? We got 8 minutes still.
So there's Frederick and Richard.
I think Richard was first. Richard,
yeah,
go ahead.
Go ahead, I don't know. Can go ahead, Frederick.
Tanakwe, would your expectations be that where tribal organisations manage grazing land, pastoral land, and they have the assets to do that successfully, or the financial resources to do that successfully, and also the sufficient control over that land, would the expectations that they would tend to default to a longer term perspective on how that grazing land should be managed in terms of resilience and sustainability? Do you have examples of that?
Yeah.
Type of longer term thinking?
No, thanks for that question, Richard. I actually don't think they default to that. I think they already set the bar. I think they do, and the Māori entities that I've worked with for, you know, many 20 years or so, that's exactly what they do. For example, just one example, my tribe has a company, you know, called Ngāi Tahu Farms, and that's exactly what they do. They're research informed. They have a strong value set around those values that I referred to earlier, such as Kaityaki tanga. They're very concerned about the impact. A lot of it is research driven, actually, which is there's quite a degree of collaboration with research institutions and universities. And the challenge that they set for themselves is, how do you apply concepts like Kaityaki tanga, guardianship? How do you apply that in a production context to ensure that your use of your lands does not have a negative impact on Mahingakai, as I referred to earlier, or our adjoining lakes, rivers and streams. So many of the Māori farming entities that I've worked with, say, over many years, they set their own bar, and generally it is quite high. And because they have to report back to their shareholders, who are Māori, you know, they push that bar as well. So, you know, I don't think it's a default at all. I think they have accepted the challenge themselves of how to apply tikanga Māori and the values that we have, once again, such as Kaityaki tanga, but there are many others, and I've only referred to one this morning. There are many other value sets that they apply in their planning, in their land use and their production methods.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Frederick.
Thank you. It was a wonderful presentation. Thank you very much. I would like to return to the point of Suzanne, where if I understood it well, it was mostly about the clash between the Western romanticized visions on indigenous practices and the way reality shows up. Now, I think it's an interesting point or perspective to also look within Europe, for instance, at local transhuman herders or Welsh sheep herders in the highlands, I tend to look at those people also as indigenous in a way. I know it's difficult to do that because it's a bit contradicting the traditional view here. But I liked what you said before about describing the interaction with the local landscape as and the indigenous character of it as an intensity. You know, actually, we should rather talk about intensities, and it may be a way around the more difficult discussions about place and time. Now, it's interesting because it reminds me of research I was doing with sociologists that have looked at the concept of tradition, which is very near to what we're seeing here. So tradition, according to those people, was defined as a nexus of 4 dimensions, basically. So you have place and you have time. So where are you looking at? Is it a traditional place? Is it since a long time? But then also they added the dimension of know-how. So knowledge as one dimension of tradition. And then also, if I recall it well, I think it was meaning or the more, the spiritual side or the meaningfulness of the enterprise. And it is within that 4-dimensional network that they place tradition. So I'm saying this because it opens up avenues for reconsidering tradition as not something that is only connected to a place and a time, but also that brings in that intensity that you were mentioning before.
No, look, I think you raise a great point. I mean, the description that I often apply to tradition is this notion of continuity of the present. It's an idea that I mean, for me, it's quite important because if you take this notion of tradition, and we don't kind of categorize it as past, present, or future, because the danger is we do tend to over-romanticize. We can over-romanticize the past, and if we do that, we actually, I think we go down the track of dehumanizing, which for me is a real challenge. And look, I won't go into that and too deeply now, but for me, tradition is this notion of the continuing present and your association with your place, which goes back through time. You get a sense not only of time, but the notion of that ongoing present, the accumulation of knowledge in a place, the ability to view through generations trends, patterns in the environment, changes. Science is certainly clearly does that using its approaches, but indigenous communities have done that, it's through trends and observations, and the building up of a knowledge base, or what we call in Māori, mātauranga Māori, but another term that we use is maramataka, and maramataka is very local knowledge in a place, very localized. So it's how do we draw on all that knowledge and that expertise to inform our management and our planning and the processes that we apply to our lands. But look, no, Leroy, you raised some really great points, and I actually agree with them.